You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place.
Hey y'all, Michael here. A couple of quick reminders on exciting stuff. I have a new book coming out in April. It is a cosmic horror novel called Children of Solitude about a guy in the mountains of western North Carolina who returns to his ancestral Appalachian homestead after the death of his estranged mother, only to find her house is haunted, or worse. It was a lot of fun to write, and I have really enjoyed getting to share little previews of it with people at various Horror Writers Association readings and bookstore events. If you want to find out when that can be pre-ordered or when it's gotten published by Gold Dust Publishing, there is a link in the show notes for this episode. There is also a post on Facebook on the Arcane Carolinas page, and there will be a link at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. I may post a reading from it too, but if so, that'll be on Patreon because this is a book for grown-ups. In terms of live appearances, Charlie and I will both be at RetCon in Durham, North Carolina, February 21st to 23rd. If you've been to RetCon before, keep in mind the location has changed this year. Hope to see you all there. The following weekend, I'll be selling books and giving away Arcane Carolina swag on Friday, February 28th and Saturday, March 1st at the Nevermore Film Festival at the Carolina Theater of Durham. Come see some amazing horror movies and buy some books and say hey. On March 13th, I'll be at the South Carolina State Library in Columbia to talk about The Other Gray Lady of South Carolina, which is going to be a lot of fun. On Tuesday, April 8th, I'll be at Durham County South Regional Library to present Carolina Cryptids at 6:30, and fingers crossed for Charlie being able to join me for that. And May 23rd through 25th, I'll be at Carolina Fear Fest selling books and giving away swag. We also have Congregate in July, we have Spooky Season Kickoff in September, and we've got another library talk lined up for November. But more info on those as we get closer in time. And now, without further ado, a super fun episode Charlie and I got to record in the very fancy podcasting studio at UNC Chapel Hill. Thanks for listening.
I don't know that we can use any of this.
I don't think we can, actually. That's really funny to me.
We will cut all of that and make it a Patreon bit.
Yes, there we go. I like that. Yeah. This is what happens when we record in person.
So for those of you just joining us, which is all of you, because none of you are in the room with us right now, Michael and I just recorded a solid 90 seconds of highly inappropriate jokes.
Very, very inappropriate, but also funny.
Yes. Welcome back to Arcane Carolinas. I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw.
I am your other co-host, multi-award-winning novelist, Michael G. Williams, with a new book on the way.
Yes, and I have heard an excerpt. The P is not silent.
The P is not silent.
P is not silent. There you go. I have heard that excerpt. There you go. There's your stinger. Charlie can't say a word. Shocker. And this is just like the old episodes. I have heard that same bit twice, and I really liked it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that'll be cool. We are in the glorious UNC Chapel Hill studios today.
We are. We are back in a studio that we used to record the Red Strings episode.
Yeah, which I am still trying to figure out how to incorporate red strings into my clothing because I'm like, that's cool.
It is cool.
But yeah, this is a Michael episode. Take it away, Michael.
Yes. Today, we are going to talk about the ill-tempered ghost of Bertie County, North Carolina.
I like it already. This will be explained, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Does the ill temperament come from the previously deceased experience, or was that person very nice and became ill-tempered as a spirit?
Oh, very much the former.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The person who chronicled this in the format where I first saw it referred to the living person as ill-tempered.
Okay, so the temperament carried on into the afterlife.
Oh, yeah. In fact, maybe got worse. Maybe didn't get worse, depending. I don't know. This comes to us from Bertie County, North Carolina, Bertie, which is one of the oldest of the modern counties in the state. It was broken off from other counties over time during the colonial period, so it's a county that predates the Revolution.
Cool.
The indigenous people of Bertie County were, and still are, the Tuscarora.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We've talked about them.
Mm-hmm. They speak, and I'm possibly about to mispronounce it, but I have tried really hard to find pronunciation guides.
The P is not silent.
The P is not silent. It's actually relevant to this, believe it or not.
Okay.
They speak Scarora, which is where the name Tuscarora comes from. It is an Iroquoian language and is related to Cherokee.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does not have a P in it.
It does not.
So the P is silent. Absent.
We're going to get to that. That's actually a no, believe it or not. Various sources estimate that the Tuscarora population around 1700 was as high as 25,000 people.
Wow.
Even the English surveyor who first mapped the coast for the colonial government in 1701 recorded them as having at least 15 major towns. And that was his word for it. And it's important to remember that at the time, as always, European colonizers were very eager to diminish the significance of native populations. So if he said they had 15 major towns, they had a lot of towns. This was a very active and large population. Interestingly, they were not one people. They were a confederation of multiple tribes.
Which is not uncommon.
Yeah. There were at least 3 distinct tribal identities within the Tuscarora Nation, and they each very actively identified as different from one another. But they were all part of the Tuscarora people.
A melting pot.
Yes. One of those groups went by the name Scarora, which was their language's word for loblolly pine in the water.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Names for themselves identified a lot with what their agricultural practice was or what their setting was.
The geographical location and the flora of the environment.
Yeah. We've got names for a lot of their towns, and those names are from Scarora. And one of the things, I won't dive into it at length, but one of the resources that I found reading about this was somebody who spoke Scarora who wrote down, this is how you actually say this name.
Okay.
And this is what it means, for instance. And so one of their largest towns was named their language's word for this is where our ancestors lived also.
Okay.
So like they had a long presence, you know, they had a really strong cultural impact.
I'd like to take a moment.
Yeah.
Take a beat.
Sure.
And share. I like this part of the episodes, and I laugh at the comments that are like, how come they don't get to the ghost right away? Well, it's called context.
Yeah.
And we like to build out the history. So if you're just joining us, this is part of it. We've picked up some new listeners, and some of the comments we've gotten are like, there's too much history. I'm like, let me let you in on a secret. This is actually a history podcast with a spooky wrapper.
Yeah. You know, somebody who says, well, I don't want to hear the history part. Okay, well, fast forward or listen to a different show. I don't know.
Right.
You know?
We also got a wonderful series of comments after the last time we recorded in here from several people that they don't know how you tolerate my interruptions. So this interruption was for you.
Oh, there we go. Lovely. I love it.
This is how people talk.
We are 2 individuals who have had a lot of conversations. This is another conversation. No.
But now we'll circle back.
I think a lot of people also expect that the show will be very heavily scripted and rehearsed and performed.
Oh, yeah, it's not that.
And it's not that. A lot of my part is effectively scripted because otherwise I'll just the entire time. Or as I just did. But our conversation is organic.
Yeah, I don't know what you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
We're allowed to interrupt each other. It is supposed to be conversational.
It's going to be okay.
We do want to hear notes from people.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a little perspective for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome, new people. I'll mail you a sticker if you want. Free of charge.
Yeah, we do love that. We love doing that.
Yeah.
We do that all the time. Back to the Tuscarora.
And eventually a ghost. Hang in there.
Those 3 nations were further subdivided and still are into numerous clans or family groups that were matrilineal. A Tuscaroran would be born into a clan through their mother, not their father. Mm-hmm. And that clan identity was, as far as I can tell from what I've read, almost as important as their national identity.
Cool.
Also, these power structures and clan identities meant that there were multiple executive powers within the Tuscarora people.
Checks and balances.
And that is very important to their history. In the early 18th century, the Tuscarora were referred to as the Southern and Northern Tuscarora. And in this context, Southern means the Tuscarora peoples that were near modern-day New Bern, because they were in the southern part of eastern North Carolina. And Northern meant the Tuscarora peoples who lived in the northern part of eastern North Carolina in what is now Bertie County. In the first decade of the 18th century, though, tensions between the Southern Tuscarora, led by a gentleman named Chief Hancock, and the English colonizers grew significantly. The English were raiding their lands, attacking their people, and selling captives into enslavement in Pennsylvania.
We talked a bit about this, I think, in the episodes about Bath.
Yeah.
In one of the Bath episodes, we touched on this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, like we've talked about in other episodes, that tactic of enslavers being to take somebody hostage and then traffic them far enough away that they can't easily get back home on their own. That's what they were doing.
There's
here.
a blueprint.
Yeah, exactly.
I almost said best practices, but that felt really inappropriate.
Definitely not. Definitely not the term that you want for human trafficking. Human trafficking is a worst practice.
Yeah, I understand that, but if you're going to do it.
This is how they did it.
Yes,
this was the standard.
Yeah. The corporate speak. Can you imagine the HR meetings?
Oh, my God. This led to the Tuscarora War from 1711 to 1713. I am not going to deep dive into the Tuscarora War.
I think we already did.
No, we didn't. Mm-mm. We talked a little bit about it.
Okay.
But the actual Tuscarora War is a fascinating item from history and kind of deserves to be its own episode at some point.
Okay.
I will simply say the Northern Tuscarora, who was led by a guy named Chief Blunt. Chief Blunt and the Northern Tuscarora refused to join the Southern Tuscarora in their war against the English. And in fact, Blunt closed off his lands to everybody, posted sentinels to prevent Southern Tuscarora from entering his territory in search of refuge, and stayed friendly with the English colonizers in modern-day Bertie County.
Okay.
And as a result, once the war was over, the Colonial Assembly granted Chief Blunt 56,000 acres in Bertie County as a reservation.
Okay.
That reservation and the area around it became known as Indian Woods. And that became the name of that part of Bertie County. And we have talked in the past also, in that Bath episode, I think, about the fact that there is a place on old maps called Indian Woods. Mm-hmm. And that's their reservation. That reservation also immediately got encroached on by English settlers, and
it was best practices.
Yeah. And
worst practices.
Yeah. So the English immediately
started. Manual.
It was right there. It was in the business plan from day one. The English immediately started encroaching on the 56,000 acres, poaching on their lands, settling on their lands. And the Colonial Assembly's solution to this was to create a, quote, Indian Commission, to which they appointed all the people who had done all the encroaching and poaching. And that Indian Commission said, oh, okay, well, that's just not your land anymore. But there we go.
And just remember, they all had English accents still. So think of the snootiest English accent when you're imagining how that conversation went.
There's a debate around that, actually.
Oh, good heavens. I do believe we should form a commission. Yes.
Commission was slang at the time for steal everything from them.
Well, just take it, but we'll put it in the commission.
Once you have the right people sign it, you can do anything you want.
Good heavens. The commission said it's fine.
So there's actually debate around whether their accent sounded like that at the time, and we don't know for sure.
Don't take this from me.
Okay.
I need this.
All right. You can keep that reenactment.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. I do not wish to take anything that anybody needs from anybody.
You'll have to form a commission to do it.
I will. I'm going to do the Regional Accent Commission, and it's going to take away English accents. By the end of the 1700s, what had been thousands of people living on a reservation of 56,000 was now a couple of hundred people living on 2,000 acres. Yeah. Over the course of the 19th century, most remaining northern Tuscarora, i.e. the ones in North Carolina, had come to be called the Southern Tuscarora instead, because the Southern Tuscarora had relocated to New York.
The old switcheroo.
Yeah. And they joined the Iroquois Nation and are now formally the sixth nation of the Iroquois Confederation.
Okay. That's yeah, watch this. We can go more north than you.
Yeah, pretty much. They were like, okay, well, these people clearly are not cool with us, so we're going to go somewhere else. Oh. Neither the state of North Carolina nor the federal government recognize any of the remaining groups of Tuscarora in North Carolina, but there are several organized groups in the state who claim that heritage and have direct ties, and they know what clans they were born into and everything, and they have a structure. They have a formal tribal government. It's just not recognized by the state or federal government.
It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Exactly. The last native speaker of Scarora is reported to have died in 2020.
That is really recent.
Yeah. UNESCO classifies that language as critically endangered, but there are some places, such as in New York, there are some places where it is still actively being taught, and it is actively being taught to children as a second language.
That's cool.
Yeah. It is worth noting that Poquoson, which is a special type of geographic feature in Bertie County, is an Algonquin word that the Tuscarora borrowed in because Scarora does not include the consonant P.
Oh, we've come full circle.
We have.
Wow.
Look at that.
See? That's the magic, people.
It is.
That is the magic of silly interruptions.
Indeed. Right there. But Poquoson is basically an elevated swamp. It's like a swamp on a little plateau. It is just high enough that it is normally not submerged, but it is low enough that periodically it will be submerged. When that happens, really acidic soil and vegetable matter gets left behind, and then the water drains away. That makes the soil really rich, but also very imbalanced. A common practice among the Tuscarora, a standard agricultural practice for them, was to let vegetation grow on a Poquoson and then burn it, because that would add nitrogen to the soil and fix it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Agriculture.
Yeah, they had a very complex agricultural system. All the classic crops that indigenous peoples grew, squash and corn and et cetera. Yeah. They were very active hunters, fishers. They were extremely complicated in their economy, and they had very complex diplomatic relations with everybody around them also. That is the people and place where this happens.
Now we get to the ghost for that guy that sent us an email. Here, let's go ahead and, all right, timestamp it. Ghost time.
That guy can go back to pressing play.
Yep.
The legend as it is told. Bum, bum. Daniel Barefoot used to be a state legislator in North Carolina.
I'm sorry. Are we not doing the spooky?
Okay. Are you doing the spooky music underneath my? Okay. You're under the voice over there. Okay.
All right.
A former state legislator in North Carolina, Daniel Barefoot.
Danny Shoeless.
Danny Shoeless. He is a former state legislator. He's written a bunch of books of folklore and history of North Carolina and South Carolina. He wrote a book called Seaside Specters.
I like the alliteration.
Yes, absolutely. That's where I found this legend first.
The grumpy ghost.
The grumpy ghost.
Old Danny Shoeless and the grumpy ghost.
He's telling it like it is, let me tell you. He's not holding back about this ghost. A man named John Castellaw. I talked to a librarian from Bertie County Public Library about how to pronounce some of these names. I am probably still going to get some of them wrong.
It happens.
But a man named John Castellaw in the middle of the 19th century, his unnamed wife and their 3 children had a farm in the community of Turkey Swamp, which Barefoot says was about 3 miles west of Windsor, which is the county seat of Bertie County. And if you look up on a map, you don't see Turkey Swamp labeled anymore, but I was able to find an older map that had Turkey Swamp labeled.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah,
like,
it really
old maps are awesome.
Yeah, it's so good. Turkey Swamp was basically a community that's just like right outside of downtown Windsor.
Sure.
If you happen to know Bertie County, then that is meaningful to you.
I do not, but I like Turkey Hill, so therefore I like Turkey Swamp.
There we go. All right. Maybe it's Turkey Poquoson. You never know. It's a little swamp on a hill. So
it'd be the worst ice cream flavor.
Oh, it's so acidic.
It's full of vegetables. Vegetables.
I have to burn something over this in order to make it better. Barefoot describes Castellaw's wife as, quote, a shrew.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Saying that she and Castellaw, quote, argued and berated one another almost constantly.
I've read this book.
Their 3 children, presumably they got along at least occasionally, were 2 girls named Mary and Millie and a son named David. Mr. Castellaw showed overt favoritism to Millie. And Mrs. Castellaw countered this by showing explicit favor for Mary.
Oh, boy, this is a really healthy household.
Yeah, this is definitely the most functional family possible. They were putting the dis in dysfunctional. Their son, David, was old enough to get out of town and start a life on his own, and he did so in 1862 by volunteering for the Confederate Army.
I was about to say good for him when he got out, but I'm like, maybe pick a different route. Maybe pick a different route.
Maybe just a little bit.
Go work in a mine. Do something.
Right. There are better options.
I don't like the trajectory of his future.
For real. Barefoot notes, however, that David may have had a favorite of his own between his parents because he gave his mother, Mrs. Castellaw, a large sum of money before departing, and she buried the fortune somewhere on their property without telling her husband where.
Boys do love their moms.
Barefoot notes Mrs. Castellaw's health had not been great. She began to fade shortly after David's departure for the war. Shortly after that, she died. But before she did, she called Mary, her favorite, to her and said, quote, "If you stay here with your father and your sister after I'm gone, I'll come back from the dead and pluck out your eyes."
Ooh.
Yeah.
Gnarly.
There's a parting gift from Mom.
It's a really healthy family. I mean, we should all aspire to.
That's what you call open communication, Charlie.
Okay. At least we knew where she was.
Yeah. Mrs. Castellaw then died and was buried on the grounds of the family farm not far from their cabin, and almost immediately hostile paranormal phenomena started up.
Ooh.
At first, it was something simple and small. For the first few nights after her death, the family would awaken in the middle of the night to the sound of thunderous knocking at their door, only to find no one there when they threw it open. Then things escalated. They would awaken half smothered by their own quilts and bed sheets, with the bedclothes pressed to their faces. Then they started being beaten awake with their own pillows.
This is fun.
It is. Ghostly pillow fight. As they ate meals, bricks would fly from their rafters and smash against the table.
That's good. That's a bit much.
Yeah. Now we're like full on into poltergeist territory.
This reminds me of the. I know this is a second reference to an old episode, but Goose Island Witch.
Yeah.
With the bricks flying around.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They even supposedly were chased by an axe swinging itself around in the air outside their cabin in the middle of the day.
I'm just picturing like Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Very much so. But it's an axe, and it's coming for you.
It's not a broom.
No.
This is intense.
The family soon realized that they were not going to be allowed to sleep through the night at all because this was happening every night. Every night they were being awakened, their sleep was being disturbed. So they tried switching to sleeping during the day and doing their farm work at night. And they found that all the same stuff would happen during the day. It didn't matter. Whatever was assaulting them was not going to let them rest.
It was about disrupting them, not the time of day.
Yes.
Hauntings can happen anytime.
Yeah, they can. I won't divert off into that. I do think that it's easier for haunting stuff to happen at night, but it can happen anytime.
Sure. I think that has a lot to do. Oh, we're diverting.
Okay.
I think that we have time. We're here.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. I think that has a lot to do with the lack of activity and distraction in the victim.
Oh, that's an interesting theory.
And that the perception that more activity is occurring has more to do with the brain as a receiver or transceiver, being able to send and receive various inputs and outputs.
Yeah.
Has less going on and can therefore be more open to receiving things during times where there's nothing else going on.
I like that. I like that theory a lot. The more subtle influences of the paranormal are more noticeable.
Yes. And again, we do not have the answers to the secrets of the universe or claim that is fact. We are just spitballing.
The fact I'm sitting in a university library does not mean that I'm actually going to publish that as a theory.
Right.
They started asking their neighbors to come stay with them.
Okay.
Because they thought, well, maybe if we have somebody here, it won't bother us, or maybe we'll at least have witnesses.
Yeah.
Every neighbor who came and stayed with them would just beat feet in the morning because they were terrified because it was happening to them too.
So this, again, is similar to Goose Island. Mm-hmm. In that case, it was described as a witch, not a ghost.
Yeah.
But very similar.
Very similar. There's another story that's very similar to that we're going to get to. Food would be thrown at them.
It's just wasteful.
Especially apples would be thrown at Mary, whom Mrs. Castellaw had warned to leave or else.
Bonk. Ow!
That would have hurt. You know?
If you've ever been beaned by a crab apple, which I have.
Yeah.
If it's thrown by an older boy, it can really smart.
Yeah, one would imagine. In one specific encounter that Barefoot describes, John Castellaw sat down under a tree in the yard after a long day of working, only to have his hat knocked off his head. When he put it back on, it got knocked off again. When he put it back on, it got knocked off again. And he cried out, "I can put it back on as many times as you knock it off, I reckon." And the spirit yanked some of his hair out by the roots.
Ooh.
To make the point. These hostile acts were so frequent that the family had come to refer to the spirit as the thing. And John Castellaw would call it that damned booger.
Nice.
Which I think is so great. But otherwise, nobody would openly say that they believed it was Mrs. Castellaw.
Okay.
While all this was happening, David had come to his senses and deserted the Confederate Army.
Okay, so the trajectory of his life is now trending longer.
And he then joined the Union Army.
Okay, better choice, but still your trajectory just back to shorter.
Yeah, it's funny though. There's actually, I feel like that was something that a lot of people did. They would join the Confederate Army, wind up close enough to the Union Army. We talked about this in the Red Strings episode, and then be like,
right.
"Hey, fellas.
Hey, what's going on? Y'all hiring?"
So he had served out the rest of the war in the Union Army and mustered out in 1865 and came back home.
Trajectory just lengthened again.
Yeah.
He might live to 37 now.
He might.
as was the style at the time.
But he told the neighbors once he came back and had had some exposure to what was happening, "I've seen the spirit that attacks us, and it is the ghost of our mother."
Interesting.
Yeah. The two of them did like each other a lot.
Yeah.
So then in 1867, David died.
I kind of called that one.
Yeah, you did.
Look at that.
Barefoot doesn't say how or why the son died so young. He simply noted it as having occurred.
Because it was the 1800s.
Yeah. And after that, John and Mary and Millie decided that they had had enough, and they packed up and moved to another farm much closer to town. And apparently there they had no more troubles.
Nice. I like that.
They sold the farm, where their mother and her treasure had been buried, to a man named Simpson, who Barefoot does not report had any problems with any ghosts.
I wonder if he ever found the treasure. I guess
that's
not.
A good question. Barefoot says that some locals say that Simpson found the treasure and made use of it in one way or another. But others say that the mother's spirit never would have allowed another person to find her money, a gift from her son, and that she may still guard it to this day.
I like that. That's a fun one.
I like that one too.
This has all the markings of classic storytelling.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can just hear Tally say it.
Yeah. Almost did a Tally voice. I'm not even going to try. Doing panels with the two of you.
Oh, I bet.
When he gets going and then...
Yeah. Because I slip right back into
and then you'll fire off stuff really fast, and I'm just sitting in the middle going, huh?
It reminds me of when I was in Scotland and the lady that I was staying with needed to play translator between me and a Scottish guy.
You're both speaking the same language.
Yeah, we were both speaking English, but right. You know. So there is an elephant in the room with this story, I think. Which is, gosh, doesn't this sound a lot like the Bell Witch story?
I thought about that.
Yeah.
I was trying to keep it a little more local, but yeah, it does sound a lot like the Bell Witch.
Totally. But I don't think that's because anyone along the way knew the Bell Witch story and decided to recast it as the Bertie County Witch story.
No, and I don't think that... I almost said symptoms. It's not a symptom. The activities. I don't think activities need to be mutually exclusive between paranormal occurrences, right?
No. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of similarities in part because humankind has always been creative about how to drive one another to an early grave. But we only ever had so many reasons to do, you know, and we've only ever had so many reasons to come back also. We have ghost stories that are about love. We have ghost stories that are about hate. We have ghost stories about protecting. We have ghost stories about getting revenge. Those are pretty much it. We have ghost stories about doing the same thing over and over forever.
This one just feels like a ghost story about being petty.
Yeah, right? It feels very much in that like revenge category a little bit.
But like,
kind of hate, kind of revenge.
But like, revenge and hate, like there's no catalyzing event.
No, it's just like...
It's just petty.
It's just, oh, I'm dead, but I'm not done yet. I'm going to get that last word.
The pettiest ghost.
Yeah. And I think this story also encodes an unpleasant reality about history and about now, which is that a lot of people are abused, and abused people feel trapped, and they rarely effect an escape.
Even from beyond the grave.
Yeah, even dead. She can't get away from being in this constant fight, you know? There's no rest. It was a lot easier in olden days for a man to simply walk away than it was for a woman. And that happened a lot. You know,
go down the corner store for a pack of smokes.
Head into town for, I don't know, another
axle for your wagon. Because you're going to have to ford a river later and, you know, it might break.
Yeah. But it was a lot harder for women. And thus, realistically, death was often people's only escape. And that is a real bummer of a point to make. What is otherwise a really fun episode.
This episode is all sunshine and rainbows.
But as Tally says, I even have a note for this. As Tally says, everybody knows ghost stories always start with nice things happening. I also think this encodes really important value to convey, which is don't show favorites between your kids. At least not where they can notice.
You want a personal story about?
Sure.
Journey with me back to, I don't know, like early to mid aughts, 2000s. And it's Easter. And we're at my aunt's house. Cousins are there. My brother's there. I'm there. Aunts, uncles, all gathered around the table to share some ham and deviled eggs in a delightful Jell-O mold that I still enjoy to this day. Sometimes called Watergate salad in the Midwest.
Oh, yeah, Watergate salad. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
We just always called it Jell-O mold because it's a bunch of stuff in a mold, in a bun cake mold.
Yeah.
You know, my grandmother, I love her. She's still with us. So this isn't like a...
We don't need to pour one out just yet.
Yeah. She's awesome. Looks around the table and for no discernible reason... As I'm stuffing my face with food, you know, Charlie's always been my favorite.
Just unprompted?
Just unprompted. Which made me feel simultaneously like $1,000,000 and like the biggest heel.
Yeah. You didn't ask her to say that.
No, and I'm just sitting there shoving food in my mouth like, we all look around at each other and just go, okay. And again, this was probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
She's still with us and fine. So this wasn't a lapse of judgment.
No, this wasn't the beginning of the end or anything.
No, this was a conscious decision.
Yeah. Oh, man.
And I'm like, did I miss something? Did like one of my cousins do or say something to like make her mad? My brother is, this is fine to leave in the episode. We're telling personal stories. Not insignificantly younger than me. So like, I know he didn't do anything. Like I'm looking at him like he's still a kid.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I'm like.
He didn't steal a car.
Right.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, did somebody do something? Did I miss something? Like, I'm just eating some ham and some deviled eggs.
Looking around my family, it'd be like, whose meth lab blew up? Whose meth lab blew up?
Why is she saying this right now?
Yeah.
What have I not been informed of?
Which one of you was stealing copper?
Right. So, anyway, I just thought that was a funny, relatable bit. We still joke about that, not with her. I don't say anything to her about that.
When people in my family say they're in construction, what they mean is they're in construction sites. One day I'm going to tell my favorite family story on this show. I hope they start listening to it by then.
My mom and dad might hear that, but I don't think anybody else is going to hear that story, and they'll remember it. they'll be like, oh, yeah, that did happen.
Part of the burden of expressing that kind of thing in front of other kids, though, is that it's the kid who got favorited who has to bear the consequences of it, you know?
Right. I'm like, well.
That's messed up.
Now I'm like, what are my cousins looking at me like? You know, my brother, again, was young enough that I don't think it really even sunk in. He's heard me joke about it since then, but yeah, don't tell your kids which ones you favor.
Yeah.
Try not to favor one.
Yeah. I am reminded by this whole story also of a joke from The Simpsons that I was also coincidentally reminded of by an episode of Weird Studies, a show that I like a lot. And it's from an episode where Homer decides to get really involved in being a parent. And at one point, Bart says, just for your information, your half-assed underparenting was a lot more fun than your half-assed overparenting. Which I think is really funny.
Yeah.
Even if Mrs. Castellan meant well when she said, leave your father or I'll pluck your eyes out from beyond the grave.
Don't put that on the kids.
Yeah, maybe that's the wrong way to go about expressing love.
Yeah. I think we've come a long way since 18 whatever.
Yeah. Is that legend true? Was the very first question I had when I got to reading it. And that is hard to say. So Castellaw has a lot of variant spellings and pronunciations, and probably these days it is most familiar to modern ears as a family name by virtue of Elvis Costello, because that's that family name just transformed. It is a very common surname in Bertie County.
Oh.
It is extremely common as a surname.
So you could probably find somebody to line up with it.
Oh, totally.
Okay. I like that. I get excited when that happens.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, there might be meat on the bone.
The problem, much like with the Blue Lady, the problem was that once I dug into the census records, there were too many good candidates.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah. You can go looking for census records, and Bertie County is just filled to brimming with Castellaws, Castellos with an E-S, all kinds of variations. I even found census entries for a Millie Castellaw and a Mary Castellaw, each of whom was listed as a housekeeper for separate families in Windsor, in Bertie County, in 1870, so only a few years after all of this.
This is real.
Those families lived next door to each other, and Mary and Millie had by then become young women who were their live-in housekeepers.
There is something to this one. These people existed.
Yeah. I couldn't find anything that directly documented John Castellaw, their father, or a Mrs. Castellaw, or Mary and Millie living with a John and a wife or anything like that. And I also didn't have any luck finding David in the census records. But this story is a great reminder to not give up when the first thing you check doesn't pan out.
Yeah.
Because the Bertie County Public Library has a Facebook page, and they use Facebook Messenger. And so I messaged it and said, hi, I co-host a show about folklore and legends in the Carolinas, and I have some questions about a story set in Bertie County. Could somebody at the library help me? Well, Ryan Bryant, the librarian and branch manager, is the person who reads their instant messenger. And he wrote back and said, yeah, how can I help? So he went looking, and he
slid right in those DMs.
I slid right into the library's DMs. That's the level I'm on. People need to get on my level, is what I'm saying. Everybody else can go do their weird whatever with other people. I'm going to be talking to the libraries.
Yes.
He was a huge help in researching this legend and the history behind it. He answered a ton of questions. He helped me with pronunciations. He talked to me about, like, how common are these names now? Super resource. Again, folks, if you have a question, go find the public library in that place and talk to somebody there. He found a book titled Bertie in Blue, Experiences of Bertie County's Union Servicemen During the Civil War.
Oh, was our boy in there?
Written by a local historian named Gerald W. Thomas. Thomas is a retired federal official and congressional auditor, and he has written several highly detailed and researched books and articles about Bertie County's role in various conflicts, and as far as I can tell, is still writing today, so good on him. In Bertie in Blue, David Castello, O.W. not A.W., is listed as a Bertie County soldier who volunteered for the Confederacy on July 5th, 1861. The Confederates listed him as being age 23. David then deserted sometime before the end of his
That's
service.
our guy.
He volunteered for the Union on July 21st, 1863, and listed his age as 29. But he's the same person.
Yeah.
And the Confederacy listed him as officially deserted in October of 1863, long after he was gone. He then mustered out of the Union Army in June 1865. So it is not made up. This family, at least, is not made up. Every last one of the kids was real and can be documented, can be found in the record as a real person in the right place at the right time with the right relationships.
Something happened.
Something happened.
I love when this happens. This hasn't happened for us in an episode in what feels like forever.
Yeah.
This is great.
I was so excited when Ryan
Publish
Bryant...
this tomorrow.
Okay.
Stop everything. Edit this now.
Ryan Bryant, many thanks to him.
I'm going to stop cutting you off in a second, but I'm like really excited right
That's
now.
That's wonderful.
Because I feel for the, here's some behind the curtain details. I feel like everyone that I've been picking for the last like several is just like, yeah, and then I debunked that.
I actually didn't do one because I had all the notes and then I started doing the research and it was immediately debunked. Yeah. And I was just like, no, that's no fun. I want one where some stuff lines up.
File it away. We'll do it later.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this one's awesome.
Yeah, I love this story. Massive props to Ryan Bryant from Bertie County Public Library. He scanned the pages, emailed them to us, got it all lined up, was able to do all the confirming.
We should send them copies of the books.
Oh, absolutely. That's a good idea. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to take care of that. We have talked many times about the fact that there are plenty of people back then who were real, but they were poorly documented.
Yeah.
And the Civil War generated a ton of personal correspondence and documentation, but official documentation was often disrupted by the Civil War outside of the context of military and government records.
We talked about in the Red Strings episode, your mail would get read, and sometimes it wouldn't even get to where it was going. Yeah.
A ton of the correspondence we have is because it was seized by both sides.
Right.
Even the official records from that time relied on people providing accurate information when they interacted with the government. Thus, David gives his age as 23 in 1861, and 2 years later gives it as 29.
Somebody told him, hey, man, this is how you get through.
Yeah, exactly. There was some reason why he wanted to do this. I don't know. Maybe he lied at the beginning. Maybe he lied later. He doesn't show up in any census records from any of the decades that we know he would have been alive. And it's just because that kind of stuff gets lost, gets disrupted. They're not home when the census taker comes. We have talked about legends with a lot thinner history behind them.
Yeah.
And I have said that I felt like they had been proven to be at least possibly factual. And I feel like this, for me, absolutely passes that sniff test.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is fantastic.
Is it really that simple and literal? I don't know.
I hope so.
I think it also encodes some important history about that area, though. And here's why. I'm going to try to summarize a lot of history very rapidly, so hang tight. But
I'm buckling up.
I'm going to take some corners on two wheels.
Okay. All right. 5-point harness time.
Yes. When Bertie County was carved out and made its own county, there was an instant rivalry between two factions over where the county seat would be.
Why is this always a thing?
It is always a thing.
It's always
a thing. That rivalry came down to two specific locations, and each location had a faction of plantation owners backing it because those are the people who owned everything in those two locations.
Right.
They wanted the county seat to be where they would get paid for anything that got built there. Several of them were also members of the Colonial Assembly and politically very connected.
Different than a commission.
Yeah. And so they were playing all this out at the highest levels of the colonial government. Eventually, the governor had to step in and tell Bertie County to put its courthouse and jail in a compromise location. That didn't make either faction super happy.
Well, good compromise leaves no one happy.
But one of the people in one of those factions owned everything where that compromise location was. That location came to be known informally, and possibly only in retrospect, as a town called Cashie, which is a reference to the Cashie River that ran through it. In 1961, a local historian named Harry Thompson presented a talk to the Bertie County Historical Association titled The Lost Town of Cashie, in which he pointed out that in the late 17th and 18th century, there were more boats than horses in Bertie County, and there were no roads.
Wow.
Other than roads that somebody might cut through their own property.
Yeah.
There was not a system of roads, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Desolate.
Very, very. As such, whoever owned the property around a landing, or they owned a bridge, or owned the property on either side of a bridge, stood to make a fortune. Boats would navigate the rivers to bring trade and people, and import-export tariffs were levied anytime a boat docked and unloaded goods or persons. In the not-quite town of Cashy, where the state ordered the courthouse and jail to be built, there was also a public warehouse, quote-unquote, where goods like tobacco and cotton and whatever were brought to be weighed and have the taxes on them determined by the local government. The actual courthouse and jail were very small, so the justices of the peace, who were the effectively everything local government at the time, they would conduct their business meetings in the county courthouse on one side of the Cashy River. The county courthouse had been built using state funds on land that had been bought from somebody using state funds, and then they would cross a bridge that was owned by somebody, and then they would go to the public warehouse, which had been built with private investor funds across the river, and it was a lot bigger. And that was where they'd do all of the public business meetings that required the public to interact with them. There was a lot of ways to make money off of the county seat being where it was. And the person who owned almost all of that was a prominent local man named James, not John, Castelaw.
Yeah.
He was one of the people with an interest in where the county courthouse was built. He sold the county the land for the courthouse. He got the contract to build it. He owned the bridge. Dude. He was one of the investors in the public warehouse on the other side of the bridge. He made money hand over fist off of this being where the county seat was.
I'm getting big Hezekiah Jones vibes.
Yes.
Man of influence. Mm-hmm. Hauntings.
Yeah.
Daughters.
Mills were also so vitally important. He owned a mill and a mill pond in this place also. And mills were so vitally important to life at the time that the colonial government actually made the land around a mill pond public land unless somebody built mills on it.
Okay.
To just be like, look, if you don't build a mill, then we're going to build a mill. Somebody has to build a mill or there can't be life in this place as we live it. James Castelaw owned a ton of land around the mill and the mill pond as well, and he leased it all to others to start mills or to build homes. So he was making money off of everything in this place. And in the end, all that success was also Cashy's undoing, because it was really, really popular as a place to take boats, take your goods, pay your taxes. It was so popular that it outgrew the infrastructure that he was willing to lease land for, and he was not willing to sell to anybody else, to let anybody else build bigger things. And so if somebody built bigger landings further up the Cashy River and all the boats started going there.
This is what happened to Bath.
Yeah, the town of Cashy disappeared.
So Bath is still there, but that's exactly what happened to them. Everything moved up north.
Yeah, exactly. There just wasn't anywhere for anybody to expand.
Yeah.
And so they just packed up and left, went somewhere else entirely.
Dude, history repeats itself throughout the state in ways that is just incredible when you really get into it.
Yeah. Cashy would have probably been a formal town and been the county seat, but this James Castelaw guy just would not let it happen. He wanted to own everything. And in the end, he strangled his own best interests and got nothing.
He got haunted.
He got, but see, James Castelaw is not the John Castelaw in the story.
Okay, so we're not saying that it was the same guy.
I don't think it's the same guy because James Castelaw and all that stuff happened in the 1700s.
Okay, all right.
John Castelaw and the ghost happened in the middle of the 1800s.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So I think that there are ways in which this story probably has had some people added to it.
Yeah.
As a way to reference this larger history of a rivalry between two parties and a lot of money being at stake and it really being a question of who's going to own what. And it's partly about mills and one of the kids is named Millie. But I think that it's also a real family who probably did have a lot of this stuff happen to them.
Yeah, something happened.
Yeah.
This is a great one. I'm very excited about this episode.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how, I just don't have the knowledge to untie the knot and say, this is the part that's real and this is the part that's not.
Sure.
Except that those kids existed and the history assigned to them is documented as real.
This is a Hezekiah Jones episode where we found the person, or the people, the family. Found the family, have the story. There's no way, no one was there, right?
Yeah.
But if you're open to exploring paranormal themes and those kinds of occurrences, then it's within the, like you said, it passed the smell test. It's reasonable that this haunting, if we're calling it that, which I think we're calling it that.
Yeah, totally.
Something happened.
Yeah.
To this family.
In the story, David says to everybody, I saw what did it, and it was my mom.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
This is a really fun episode. I really enjoyed researching all this.
Thanks for sticking with us.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes, behind-the-scenes information, and links to our social media, check out www.arcanecarolinas.com, where you can also buy the Arcane Carolinas book.
And if you like award-winning horror and science fiction, check out my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. And if you have story suggestions, comments, or questions, email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.
I'm like, how are you expecting me not to laugh? I'm over here trying to be good. All right, do that all from the top.
I was like, what? Jeez, I don't know that. He seems like a nice enough person.
Missed the mark on that one, Charlie. You're going to have a lot to cut from this.